They laughed at him every day. Every morning, as the first rays of sunlight barely lit up the building, he was already there. The old janitor, with his faded green jumpsuit and worn-out shoes, moved silently through the halls. His presence was almost ghostly, as though the building itself had come alive, and he was part of it, invisible and unnoticed. He never spoke to anyone. He never asked for help, never interrupted conversations, never made a fuss. And yet, every day, the office staff had something to say about him. They chuckled behind his back, mocked his slow, careful movements, and joked about how he probably lived in the maintenance closet. The younger interns called him Radar, joking that he could appear out of nowhere, always at the exact moment someone mentioned a broken light or a leaky faucet. They laughed, assuming he was just an old man who had outlived his usefulness, someone who had nothing to offer but his broom. One morning, as the janitor moved through the break room, sweeping up coffee grounds, one of the interns pulled out their phone and started recording. The sound of his movements was quiet, almost imperceptible. They added a catchy tune to the video, and within minutes, the office was buzzing with laughter. "Look at him, he's so ancient," someone shouted, and the room erupted into chuckles. But the janitor said nothing. He simply continued his work, unaware of the attention he was receiving. What the staff didn't know, what they couldn't see, was that the janitor wasn't just a forgotten relic of the past. He was more than what met the eye. He wasn't just an old man sweeping floors. He was someone, far more dangerous, more capable than any of them could imagine. And then, one day, everything changed. The colonel entered. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, and for the first time, the janitor's silent routine was interrupted. The colonel stopped, locked eyes with him, and spoke one word that would silence the room and send ripples through everyone's understanding of who the janitor really was. What was that word? Stay tuned, because you're about to find out. Every morning, long before the office lights flickered on, he was already there. He moved with precision, his every action calculated and measured. The same routine, the same faded green jumpsuit, the one that had been patched up so many times it was hard to tell where the original fabric ended and the repairs began. The same squeaky cart that followed him like a shadow, its front wheel emitting a soft protest with each rotation. Most of the building's occupants never noticed him. He was part of the background, like the air conditioning or the flickering fluorescent lights above. To the staff, he was just the janitor, an older man who had been around for as long as anyone could remember. His name was practically forgotten, the ID badge on his chest so scuffed it was barely legible. But that didn't matter. He was grandfathered into the infrastructure, part of the system that ran behind the scenes. Nobody expected him to speak, and he didn't. His job was simple: keep the place clean, replace air filters, fix minor things that were always overlooked until they broke. The younger staff didn't understand how it was possible for him to be so invisible, yet always so present. They gave him a nickname, Radar, because no matter where they were, no matter what they were talking about, he would show up at exactly the right moment. His movements were swift, almost silent, as if he had an uncanny ability to anticipate needs before anyone voiced them. The building security system didn't need him to scan his badge to access any room. He was already inside. But no one thought twice about it. He was just the janitor. To the analysts and techs who worked in the building, he was part of the background noise. No one really saw him, except when they needed to make a joke. He was old, and to them, that meant out of place. He didn't fit the sleek, tech-savvy world they were building. But then again, they didn't understand what was behind the calm exterior. Each day, as the rest of the office slowly began to fill with the hum of activity, the janitor quietly completed his tasks. The elevator doors would open, and the young analysts, fresh from their university degrees, would rush past him, heads down, focused on their next task. Not one of them ever stopped to wonder about him. They just assumed he was there to do his job. Nothing more, nothing less. But one person did notice. Evan Martinez, a new analyst who had only recently joined the team, began to observe the janitor more closely. It wasn't that he was particularly interested in the janitor. He just found the man's quiet precision intriguing. There was something different about him, something that didn't add up. Evan saw the janitor's mirror-polished boots, the way he never fumbled for keys or checked his cart for supplies, and how he always paused for exactly 5 seconds at the freight elevator, almost as if he was waiting for something. Most importantly, Evan realized that he never saw the janitor searching for anything. Not once had he ever seen him go looking for a mop or a wrench. He was always prepared, always one step ahead, and never in a hurry. There was no reason for Evan to be suspicious, but something gnawed at him, something he couldn't quite place. The janitor had an air of discipline and precision that didn't fit with the image of an old man cleaning the floors. Still, no one ever asked questions. They laughed, joked, and moved on. The janitor wasn't a mystery. He was just a fixture in the office, much like the water cooler or the old vending machine in the corner. But as Evan began to notice more details, he couldn't help but wonder, who is this man really? And why did he feel like something bigger was hidden beneath his quiet exterior? As the days passed, the jokes about the janitor became a regular part of office chatter. It wasn't that anyone meant any harm. It was just harmless humor, they thought. After all, who didn't love a good laugh at the expense of someone who never spoke up, who just moved about the building like a shadow, always cleaning, always watching? One Tuesday morning, as the early birds gathered near the elevator banks, the first joke of the day was launched. "Probably lives here," someone said, their voice echoing off the marble walls. "I mean, where else would he go? He's always here before us and leaves right after we clock out. Maybe he actually sleeps in that janitor's closet." Laughter rippled through the small group of analysts. A few snickered, clearly pleased with the cleverness of their observation. The comment bounced off the walls, its sound amplified in the quiet building. Another voice joined in. "Yeah, maybe the place actually comes alive at night, you know? Like one of those haunted office buildings." The laughter grew louder, more confident, as if they were building on a shared inside joke. It was harmless fun in their eyes. After all, the janitor was just a senior man, someone past his prime, someone who had clearly outlived any real value to the team. What else could he be, other than an old man doing menial work? Even Evan Martinez, the newest analyst, couldn't help but laugh along. He hadn't been at the office long enough to form any real opinions about the janitor. He'd simply noticed his silent movements and unwavering presence. But to Evan, it was easier to just laugh along with the crowd, to join in on the inside joke that had been circulating for months. And yet, something about it felt wrong. As he smiled along, he couldn't shake the feeling that the janitor wasn't just a figure to be laughed at. There was something about him that didn't fit the narrative everyone else seemed to believe. By Thursday, the mood had only escalated. It was time for the monthly office excellence recognition ceremony, a mandatory morale event filled with awkward speeches, laminated certificates, and cheap bagels. As always, the janitor was there, standing in the back of the room, quietly watching, hands clasped behind his back. He wasn't eating. He wasn't mingling with anyone. He was just observing. And once again, no one acknowledged him. No one said thank you for keeping their workplace spotless. He wasn't expected to be part of the ceremony. He wasn't even invited. He was just another invisible man in the background. Someone there to serve, but never to be seen. Amy Caldwell, the administrative coordinator who ran these ceremonies, had been doing this for years. She had perfected her routine, warming up the crowd with jokes about the faulty air conditioning, the temperamental copy machine, and the water cooler that dispensed liquid that tasted like it had been filtered through old gym socks. But today, her eyes found him. She saw the janitor standing motionless in the back, just watching. A mischievous grin crept across her face as she spotted an easy target for some quick humor. She moved toward the microphone and spoke, her voice carrying across the room. And of course, we can't forget to give a round of applause to our building's guardian angel. She paused and grinned. Seriously, I think this guy is actually part of the infrastructure at this point. Anyone ever seen him sit down? Polite chuckles spread through the crowd. Some of the staff turned their heads to glance at the janitor, the subject of their latest joke. Amy was just getting started. We've all been calling him Radar because, well, he's always just there. You'll be talking about a broken thermostat, and boom, he materializes out of thin air with a screwdriver. She snapped her fingers. It's honestly kind of spooky. Louder laughter followed. Even those who had never met the janitor now felt comfortable joining in. They didn't know him, not really, but they could laugh at him, couldn't they? It was harmless, wasn't it? But the janitor didn't react. He didn't flinch, didn't move a muscle. He just stood there, still as a monument, his steady gray eyes locked onto Amy. There was no sign of anger, no sign of embarrassment. He simply observed. And then, in the middle of the laughter, the coffee spilled. It wasn't a major disaster. Just an overturned cup near the projector cart, sending liquid toward a power strip. But without a sound, the janitor was there. Quietly, methodically, he cleaned it up. His movements were quick and efficient. The spill wiped away in less than 15 seconds. The incident was handled with a precision that surprised even those who were standing closest. Amy didn't miss a beat. She leaned back into the microphone, enjoying herself now. "See what I mean?" she said, clearly relishing her role as the one in charge of the crowd. Still no expression. "I swear someone should check this guy for a serial number. We're talking full robot mode here, people." The laughter continued, but now there was something darker about it. The fun was no longer innocent. It had become meaner, sharper. The janitor was no longer a source of amusement. He had become the butt of the joke, and no one questioned it. He finished cleaning, checked the power strip to make sure it was dry, and quietly turned toward the maintenance closet. No one followed him. No one wondered where he had gone or what he was doing next. He had served his purpose for the day, and that was it. But what they didn't know was that this was the moment that would change everything. It was just another morning. The usual buzz of staff members, the clinking of coffee cups, the hum of the copy machine in the corner. But today, something was different. Colonel Daniel Briggs walked into the building like he owned it, a man whose presence demanded attention. The buzz in the room died instantly, the energy shifting as soon as he stepped into the doorway. The way he carried himself, the sharp lines of his uniform, and the authority in his posture told everyone that this wasn't just any casual visit. The janitor was there, as he always was, standing near the back of the room. His cart was parked next to the door, the faint squeak of its wheel as it shifted a soft reminder of his presence. He didn't look up as the colonel entered, didn't flinch, didn't move. He simply continued his silent work, just as he had every day before. The room grew quiet as the colonel's gaze shifted across the staff. His eyes moved from one person to the next, but when they landed on the janitor, they locked in, sharp and unwavering. It wasn't just a glance. It was as if he had been searching for him all along. For a moment, there was complete silence, the kind of silence that hangs thick in the air, making everyone aware that something important is happening. Colonel Briggs didn't say a word at first. He just stared at the janitor, his eyes narrowing slightly as if confirming something. The staff watched, unsure of what was happening. Was the janitor in trouble? Was the colonel just here for a routine visit? And then it happened. The colonel's voice broke the silence, cutting through the room like a blade. He spoke a single word, a code name that sent a ripple through the air. Ghost Viper 1. Is that really you? The words hung in the air, and for a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. It was as if time had stopped. The laughter that had filled the room just moments ago now felt distant, like it had happened in another world entirely. The janitor, who had been the subject of so many jokes, suddenly became the focus of an intense scrutiny none of them had anticipated. The reaction in the room was instant. Someone near the back of the room let out a nervous laugh, thinking they had misheard something. "Ghost Viper One?" someone muttered, their voice edged with disbelief. "What kind of call sign is that? Sounds like something from a bad video game or a cheesy action movie." But Colonel Briggs wasn't smiling. He wasn't laughing. His face was stone serious, his gaze still fixed on the janitor with a level of intensity that made everyone else uncomfortable. The janitor didn't seem startled. He didn't look confused. He didn't react in the way everyone expected. He simply stood still for a moment, as if acknowledging the recognition he had just received. And then slowly, with a movement that was deliberate and calm, the janitor wiped his hands on the rag he always carried and turned to face the colonel. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice steady and low, almost gravelly, like a soldier who had heard this call 1,000 times before. Colonel Briggs took one step forward, his posture straightening even more. "Sir, it's really you." The janitor didn't smile, didn't salute. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to convey his authority, his history, the weight of everything he had done. And with that, the shift began. The room, which had been filled with laughter moments before, now stood still. The staff, who had mocked him, laughed at him, dismissed him as just another old man, were now faced with something entirely different. The janitor wasn't just a joke. He wasn't just an invisible figure in the background. He was someone important, someone with a past that none of them could even begin to understand. The colonel, standing at attention in front of him, gave a subtle nod, a sign of respect, and with that, the room fell into a silence so thick, it was almost suffocating. The silence in the room was deafening. No one spoke. No one even moved. The air seemed charged, thick with the weight of the revelation that was unfolding before them. Colonel Briggs's gaze remained locked on the janitor, but now there was something else in his eyes: respect, awe, and a hint of reverence. "Ghost Viper One," Colonel Briggs said again, his voice steady but carrying the kind of weight that made everyone in the room feel small in comparison. "You don't know what you've been standing next to for the past 6 years." The staff members exchanged confused glances, their laughter from earlier now completely erased. The room, once buzzing with idle chatter and amusement, was now still, as if everyone was waiting for something. They weren't sure what, but they knew that they were about to witness something that would change their understanding of everything. The janitor stood still, his hands folded neatly in front of him, his gaze never wavering. His expression was calm, almost serene, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that told the colonel's words weren't new to him. He wasn't surprised, nor was he impressed. This was just another chapter in a long and forgotten history. Colonel Briggs stepped forward, the room parting as if the ground itself was making way for him. He turned toward the staff, his voice now carrying across the room, directed at them as much as it was at the janitor. "6 years ago," he began, his words slow and deliberate, "I had the privilege of working alongside this man. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a legend. Ghost Viper One is one of the most dangerous and skilled operatives I've ever known. And I would bet my life that none of you have any idea who he is or what he's done." The staff stood frozen, absorbing every word, their minds racing to piece together the truth. "Ghost Viper One didn't simply carry out missions," Colonel Briggs continued. "He extracted intelligence behind enemy lines. He infiltrated bases, sabotaged critical supply routes, and carried out extractions that saved more lives than any of you will ever realize. But none of this was ever meant to be known by the public. His operations were off the books. His deeds didn't make headlines. He didn't need recognition, and he didn't care for it. A few of the staff members exchanged uncertain glances. They didn't know what to believe. How could this quiet, unassuming janitor, this old man who barely spoke and always disappeared before the office got busy, be involved in something so far beyond their comprehension? The colonel paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. The janitor you all mocked, the one you laughed at, is the same man who, when we were pinned down in Mogadishu, held an extraction position for 19 hours. He took a round through his thigh. His arm was in a sling, and despite the odds, he maintained radio contact to coordinate air support for a unit that was fighting for its life. He never once hesitated. He didn't stop until the mission was accomplished. A ripple of shock ran through the room. The air felt heavier, the room colder, as if the very walls were closing in on the truth they were now facing. The janitor didn't flinch. His face remained calm, his posture never wavering. He had been through enough to know how this would unfold. He had served in places that most people couldn't even begin to imagine, and he had come back from the dark places that no one spoke of. But now, he was here, in this building, quietly carrying out his duties as if nothing had ever happened. The colonel's voice dropped, almost reverent. He trained my reconnaissance unit in advanced surveillance techniques in the late 1990s. The same techniques that are still in use today by some of the best operatives in the field. But you will never hear his name in connection with any of that. He never asked for anything in return. Not a medal, not a commendation, nothing. As the colonel spoke, the room fell into a hushed silence. Every word was being absorbed, but none of the staff could comprehend the depth of what they were hearing. The janitor wasn't just some forgotten soldier. He was a hero, a silent one, whose entire life had been lived in the shadows. "I know this man," Colonel Briggs said, turning to face the janitor once more. "I know his commitment and his discipline. When the operation was too dangerous, when the odds were stacked against us, it was always Ghost Viper One who stepped up. He was the one who made sure that people like me came home alive. He never asked for recognition, and he certainly never sought fame. He's not a man who walks around bragging about his past. He's a man who simply does what's necessary." The janitor's eyes met the colonel's, and for the first time, a subtle shift occurred in the way the staff looked at him. The man they had seen as nothing more than a humble janitor was now being elevated in their minds to something far beyond their comprehension. "You didn't know any of this," the colonel said, his voice softening. "Because the janitor you've been laughing at, he's been living under a different name, in a different world. A world that doesn't exist anymore. But I'll tell you this. Everything this building runs on, everything you take for granted, was possible because of people like him. And without him, none of this would be here today." The janitor finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but carried a weight that made the air feel thick with meaning. "They needed a ghost, and I was willing to become one." The colonel nodded, his expression one of deep respect. "And you've done your duty, as always." The staff was stunned, silent, unable to speak. They stood in shock, realizing that their perception of the janitor had been nothing more than a misguided fantasy, a false understanding of someone they had underestimated at every turn. The colonel turned to the room, his expression hardening. "Next time you see someone like him, someone working in the background, remember this. Not everyone who is silent is weak, and not everyone who does the dirty work is unimportant." The janitor stood still, his presence commanding, and yet he said nothing more. His work wasn't over. He wasn't here for recognition. He wasn't here to bask in the light of their new respect. He was here to do his job. And that was all. The silence that followed Colonel Briggs' revelation was unlike anything the staff had ever experienced. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was weighty, almost reverent. They had all been forced to confront something they never expected. The janitor was more than just an old man cleaning floors. He was a man with a past, a man who had lived a life of purpose, danger, and sacrifice. And now, in the same building where they had once dismissed him, his legacy loomed larger than any of them could have imagined. But the shift wasn't instant. It wasn't as though everyone immediately sprang to their feet and offered apologies. Respect wasn't something that could be handed over so easily, especially not after years of mockery. It would take time, small, subtle moments, to change the way people saw him. The next day, as the janitor moved through the halls, something had changed. People noticed him in a way they hadn't before. They didn't laugh at him. They didn't make jokes behind his back. Instead, there was a sense of quiet acknowledgement, a shift in the atmosphere that was almost imperceptible, but still noticeable. Evan Martinez, who had been the first to question the janitor's unspoken presence, was the first to make a conscious effort to change his behavior. As he walked past the janitor, Evan slowed his pace and nodded in greeting. It wasn't much, just a simple acknowledgement, but it meant something. It was the first small step toward recognizing that the man who had been invisible for so long was worthy of respect. And the janitor responded in kind. He didn't smile, didn't make any effort to show gratitude. He didn't need to. His acknowledgement was in the way he held his head high, the way he moved with the same precision and care as always. He wasn't here for praise. He was here to do his job. And that was enough. As the week went on, more subtle changes began to occur. The security guard at the entrance, who had always barely glanced at the janitor as he passed, now stood a little taller when he entered the building. He didn't say anything, but the respect was there in the way he held his posture. The staff from accounting, who had once laughed at the janitor's routine, now greeted him with a simple nod when he entered the break room to replace a flickering fluorescent bulb. It wasn't just the small moments of recognition that mattered. It was the change in the overall atmosphere. The office felt different. The laughter was quieter. The jokes that had once been thrown at the janitor were now replaced by hushed tones of reverence and awe. People were no longer questioning why he was there. They were starting to understand why he had been there all along. Amy Caldwell, who had been the most vocal in mocking the janitor, found herself staring at him more than once. She would catch herself about to make a joke, but then she would stop, realizing that it wasn't funny anymore. The man they had all laughed at was a hero, a man who had been through more than most of them could ever comprehend. And for the first time, she felt a twinge of guilt for what she had said, for the way she had belittled him. The janitor never acknowledged the shift in his treatment. He didn't need to. His work, his presence, spoke for itself. But the respect was undeniable. It was in the way people stepped aside to make room for him as he pushed his cart down the hallway. It was in the way the young interns no longer referred to him as Radar, in a mocking tone. It was in the small, almost imperceptible moments when they realized that he had always been there, silently holding the office together in a way they had never fully understood. And as the weeks passed, the respect grew. It didn't need to be spoken. It was felt. When the janitor entered a room now, there was no awkwardness, no discomfort. People didn't avoid his gaze or make jokes behind his back. They simply respected his presence, as they should have all along. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when the old jokes surfaced, when the younger analysts forgot themselves and let slip a careless comment. But when that happened, the room would fall silent, and someone, sometimes even Amy, would quickly redirect the conversation, a subtle but significant sign that the janitor was no longer the subject of ridicule. The janitor's legacy wasn't one that could be ignored or erased. It was a quiet force, woven into the fabric of the building's operations, a force that had been invisible to most for years. But now, the staff saw him for who he truly was. A man who had given more to his country than they could ever understand. A man who had sacrificed everything and asked for nothing in return. And that respect, that quiet understanding, changed the dynamic of the office in a way nothing else ever could. The janitor wasn't just someone who cleaned the floors anymore. He was someone who had earned their admiration and gratitude, not because he asked for it, but because he had lived a life that demanded it. As the weeks passed, the building continued to hum with activity, just as it always had. The janitor, who had once been invisible to the staff, was now a figure of respect. It wasn't because he asked for it. It wasn't because he had demanded anything in return. It was because his actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. The office had changed, and so had its people. The workers, once too busy with their own lives and ambitions to notice the small details, had been forced to look beyond the surface. They had been given a chance to see the janitor for who he truly was. Someone with a rich, complex history, someone who had done far more than they could have ever imagined. And now, they saw him differently. But the change wasn't just about the janitor. It was about all of them. It was about how we, as people, too often overlook the ones who do the most important work in the background. We laugh at them, we dismiss them, and we forget that they, too, have a story that deserves to be heard and understood. The janitor had spent his life doing what was needed, even when it meant going unnoticed. And that was the lesson everyone in that office learned, that there is more to every person than meets the eye. The quiet ones, the invisible ones, are often the ones who carry the weight of the world. They may never seek recognition, but that doesn't mean their contributions aren't invaluable. It's easy to judge someone based on their appearance, their position, or the role they play in society. It's easy to assume that the janitor is just another old man cleaning the floors. But what we often forget is that each person carries a history of experiences, of victories and losses, of quiet sacrifices that never make the headlines. We forget that their work, though unseen, is essential to everything around us. The janitor never asked for recognition. He never wanted anyone to know about the dangerous missions he had carried out or the lives he had saved. He simply wanted to do his job, to carry out his responsibilities with precision and care. But sometimes, the world needs to take a step back and recognize the quiet heroes who keep everything running smoothly. And that's the takeaway. That respect doesn't always wear a uniform. Respect doesn't always come with a title or a position of power. Sometimes, the most important work happens in the shadows, done by people who never ask for anything in return. And we should never forget that. So, the next time you encounter someone who seems invisible, whether it's the janitor in the hall or the quiet colleague in the corner, take a moment to think. Don't judge them based on their appearance or what they do. Take a moment to see them for who they truly are and the value they bring, even if it's not immediately obvious. Because, in the end, we're all part of something bigger, and the quiet ones often carry the most weight. As for the janitor, his story may have been hidden for years, but now, at least the people in that building knew. They understood, and they would never look at him the same way again. If this story has made you think differently about the people around you, now is the time to make a change. We all have those people in our lives, the ones who work quietly in the background, the ones who never seek attention or recognition. They may be the janitor, the maintenance worker, the administrative assistant, or anyone who does the essential work that makes the world run smoothly. So, the next time you see someone like that, take a moment to acknowledge them. Don't just pass by. Don't just take them for granted. Look at them and recognize the value they bring to your life, whether or not you realize it. It's easy to overlook people when they aren't in the spotlight, but it's those who work behind the scenes who often carry the heaviest burdens. If this story resonated with you, let us know. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts or a similar story of someone who changed your perspective. I read every single comment, and your feedback often inspires the next video. And if you want to hear more stories that challenge the way you see the world, Hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. These stories aren't just here to entertain. They're here to remind us that respect doesn't always wear a uniform, and the most important work often happens in the shadows. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Let's start a conversation about the quiet heroes in our lives and show them the respect they deserve. Remember, it's the unseen hands that keep the world turning. So, let's not forget them. Click on the next video that's waiting for you on the screen. And I'll see you tomorrow with another story that proves that heroes don't always announce themselves. Until then, stay aware and never underestimate the power of respect.